Again, welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Emily Torty. I am an agroforester for Appalachian Sustainable Development. I live in Central Virginia, and I host this super fun series where I get to talk with all kinds of amazing people with all kinds of incredible expertise in the field. And I feel really lucky to do that. And just want to thank the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation for supporting this work. It makes this webinar possible. And we are really, really fortunate to have their support in a lot of the work we do at ASD. Again, welcome, Sam and Russell. We are talking about grassroots tree searchers for farmers and by farmers. And I at least am really amped to be here and have this conversation today. Pieces of this conversation are had a lot in a lot of different spaces I'm in. So I'm just happy to be able to share it. And we'll hear more from them in just a minute. So here's where we're headed. We're just doing our little opening intro right now. Then we will get into our guest introductions and their presentation, and then we're going to go into the Q&A. And just thanks everybody who's participated this season. It's been a really great season. We've had lots of wonderful guests on. It really takes a village to put all this together. So thanks everybody. And a little bit about ASD before we move on. So our mission is to grow a stronger Appalachia through agriculture. We do that in a lot of different ways, but our work falls into sort of 5 major buckets. One of those is workforce development. We have several different workforce development tracks where we train folks with barriers to employment into agricultural professions. So folks who are working with prior incarceration or substance abuse, maybe houselessness, people who haven't been able to finish their high school education. We take these folks and help them work through just some major milestones that are really like bespoke to each person, and also train them up into different agricultural callings. So it's a really cool program. We have a lot of different ag ed programs throughout all of our different programming. So that that area of work kind of, is spread out through all, or is sort of like woven into all of them. We do a lot of food access work. We have a food box program you'll hear a little more about in just a second. Economic development. We do a lot of farmer trainings, business trainings, that type of thing. And then resource management, which is loosely where agroforestry falls. So if you want to learn more about us, go to the website, check out the programs tab. You can see all the different things we're up to. The agroforestry programs tab has all kinds of stuff, including a huge resources list. So please have a visit if you're feeling called. And again, just thanks for tuning in this fall. These are the episodes that we've done already. We did Rethinking Herbs from Forest to Farm, Alley Cropping at Any Scale, an episode all about berry plants. We talked with Zach Elfers about hickories as keystones in the tree economy, and talked last week with a panel about willow for every farm. So those will all be posted up to the YouTube playlist before too long, and including this next session today. Just a little bit about some of the impacts to date that ASD has been able to have. We have been able to sell and distribute over 40 million pounds of produce, beef, and value-added products, which is really pretty sweet because we work with a big set of regional farmers up and down 81. Our food hub is based out of deep southwestern Virginia, so we can hit kind of like a 5-state area from there. Over 170,000 pounds of food grown by new gardeners trained up in our programming. We've installed close to 300 raised beds through our farm-to-school program, and through our veterans programming. Helped preserve over 5,000 acres of forest land, supported over 5,000 farmers with trainings and resources, and then donated more than 10 million pounds of food to local and regional area food pantries, which is really cool, especially in light of the fact that that program really started in the COVID era. So that's a fairly new program with a fairly big number. So we're excited about that. And we just completed our Giving Tuesday fundraiser, and I just want to say thanks to everybody who participated. We were going for 90 grand. We hit over 73,000, and we still have a lot of checks coming in. So we are hoping that we still hit that number once all the totals are tallied. But in any case, we're really thrilled to have raised over $70,000. So thanks everybody who helped support. Welcome, Sam. Hi, Sam Bonney. So grateful to have you here. Sam grew up on the north shores of the Narragansett Bay. Their journey towards the Breadtree family has been, I do want to read this first one, actually, this little paragraph in full, because it's just beautiful. Their journey towards the Breadtree family has been a comically relentless pursuit of curiosity. Like, what a great, like, that's like a book title. It's a difficult story to unravel with disparate threads tracing back to the countless nagging questions of an idealistic, history-minded suburban kid who yearn for a deeper connection to their beloved New England. And Sam has been able to work with Champlain Orchards, tree crops guru Buzz Ferber of Perfect Circle Farm, and is now also offering orchard consulting and pruning services with Quivering Twig Horticulture, which is their business. And they've been with Breadtree since spring of 21. So thank you for being here. I feel like maybe you are also a bit of a writer, Sam. Is that correct? Just from reading your bio?
Here and there, I guess, when I can get to it.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Russell, and then I'm going to hand it over to y'all. Welcome, Russell. Russell is Breadtree's founding farmer. After working in utility scale energy efficiency, Russell made the jump to food systems work in agroforestry in 2014. And he believed that chestnuts, which are an ancient staple food across the temperate world, play an integral role in recreating an agriculture of place. And I love that phrase too, an agriculture of place. You could have a whole conversation about just that. He has dedicated the past 8 years to creating a viable business centered on the growth of a regional industry for this tree crop. So welcome, y'all. Thanks for joining. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, and you guys can do your thing.
Noah and I are co-owners of this business. Noah, I would say I'm responsible for Breadtree starting, and Noah is largely responsible for Breadtree becoming what it is. He's instigated a lot of the growth of our business, and right now is quite heroically leading the development of our processing facility project, which is certainly beyond our means, but with folks like Noah, we're able to at least make progress on it. And I can share more about the processing facility side of things if we get there in the Q&A.
Amazing. Yeah, and I guess I'll just say briefly, the reason I asked these folks on is because I've been a part of several conversations with them about the research they've been doing. And I work a lot within the university research world, and I work a lot with farmers. And I've been really inspired listening to the conversations that these folks, and also, this sort of other knot of people in this space, particularly up in agroforestry in the Northeast, have been having these really deep and rich conversations, and doing a lot of research that is really purely directed towards like, okay, I need to know this thing as a farmer to move forward in this field. And it's been really fun. It's just been really fun to watch. So that's just my jumping off point for why I asked y'all here, and I'll let you guys take it from there.
Thanks, Emily. Well, Sam, since I'm going to lead the intro slides to Breadtree, is there anything else you'd like everyone on the call to know about you or your journey to get here before I start talking about Breadtree?
I think I might just emphasize, I think it was said in the little blurb about me, but just want to emphasize that, I don't have a farming background. I grew up in the suburbs. I'm a college dropout. I'm in many ways terribly underqualified for this work, but at the same time, there's kind of nobody who is qualified. We're pretty much breaking new ground on most things that we do. And, when we talk about the field research that we're going to show you in these slides, we use the term research very, very loosely, right? It's really just about having your eyes open and asking a lot of questions and just trying to move things forward that way and do things better every day. We collect data when we can, and we try to be rigorous and back up our assertions, or at least express our confidence about our assertions along a gradient, according to how rigorous we're being. But, I don't want people to be daunted by the idea of doing agricultural research. It's as simple as just going outside and looking very closely at things and trying new things. I think that's kind of just how I'd like to start. It's just by saying that.
So Breadtree Farms today, We've transitioned about 300 acres of dairy land, which was mostly corn, soy, and hay, into organically managed and increasingly organically certified fruit and nut silvopastures. Almost entirely in New York State, but with a little bit of land that we manage in Northwest Connecticut and Southwest Vermont. And the way we've done that is really actually across a number of different approaches to land access. It started on the image you see here is the first lease I got, which was an 8-acre, 30-year lease. It was a revenue sharing lease with no upfront land fee. It's just a percentage of every chestnut we ever sell from that land goes to the landowner. But we also manage land for non-farming landowners where we plant and manage trees on 10-year contracts for them. And then we've also purchased about 2/3 of the land that we manage is land that we purchased with the support of equity investors in our business. And some of what I think, to the point that Emily was sharing earlier that we wanted to share a bit about today, is kind of like how much we needed to learn and able to make all of that happen, and how little of what we needed to learn was documented, for example, in peer-reviewed literature. This is not to say that we don't read a lot of peer-reviewed literature, but oftentimes kind of the questions that we actually need to answer in order to plan a business come more from talking to fellow farmers, or things as simple as, I pretty much spent 5 years collecting data on chestnut production in every way I could imagine before actually feeling like I believed in the business model enough to put $30,000 on credit card debt and pay it off over the course of 2 years, and basically invest my weekends in starting to build this business with no compensation. And that looked like things such as showing up at places like Badger Set or Sunset Farms here in Western Massachusetts and harvesting chestnuts, hand harvesting, and actually doing it like a time trial. How much more efficient can I make it if I lay down a tarp under a mature tree? How successfully can I rush trees or nuts off the tree without risking loss of quality in the fresh nuts? And actually just getting hands-on experience and then adding that into a financial model in the form of a spreadsheet where I could say, okay, I can say today, I know I can confidently harvest 40 pounds an hour under a 40-year-old tree that was planted in the 80s under this management system. That's generally a Chinese tree, for example. But then some of the other research we needed to do was things like, at this first planting at Otter Creek, we trialed different approaches to spacing. So this is on 100% grass-fed cattle operation, and they have grazed under those trees or around those trees once or twice a year, depending on the season, every year since those trees were planted. So we got to trial 30-foot alley spacing with 15-foot spacing in row, 40-foot alley spacing with 13-foot in row, seeing how successfully these trees were establishing when they were being dry farmed, and are we planting them too densely based on how quickly they're going to grow and how few are going to die, even in drought conditions. We also trialed things like tree shelters. So to zoom forward to here, for example, in the background, you can see some trees in welded wire cages. So those are about 2-foot diameter, 6-foot tall welded wire cages that I made from hand. I bought 100-foot rolls and cut them and rolled them up. But then there's also Tree Pro tubes in this orchard, as well as Plantra tubes. We made our own stakes initially out of metal conduit and PVC pipe, and then learned from that the hard way and started using Plantra's fiberglass system. And frankly, when I tried to find the answer to the question of what is the best tree protection strategy in a silvopasture context, 9 years ago now, what I found when I looked online, when I looked at a variety of presentations from different growers, is there really was no one answer. And that oftentimes the answers that you could find didn't really provide enough management context for me as a grower to make an informed decision about what worked best in my context. You'll see points brought up like, well, planter stake systems are really expensive. It's hard to justify that. In my experience, the cost is easily justified within a couple of years. Just as an example, I can easily carry 50 to 100 planter tubes to lay out an orchard at a time. I can pretty painfully carry 2 welded wire cages at a time. So just even like the hours saved if you're planting thousands of trees of moving those materials is it's quite hard to quantify. And so this is just one example of the research we've needed to do in order to make informed decisions. To kind of summarize that, just with tree protection, in the first 500 trees planted at this site, and this site was planted in 2019, and here you're looking at an image of these trees in 2024. Just at this site, we planted the first 500 trees were split evenly, 1/3 welded wire cages, 1/3 Tree Pro shelters, which come unfolded and you have to roll them up, and 1/3 Plantra 6-foot tubes. After that experience, we immediately decided we were only going to use Plantra tubes and their fiberglass stake system for the rest of our trees. So we've now used Plantra tubes on about 19,000 trees since then. We firmly believe in that solution, with the caveat that we are starting to trial approaches that might allow us to obviate the need to be putting a lot of fiberglass and plastic in our fields. We would prefer to not need to do that, but given the deer pressure and that establishing deer fences at the scale that we would need is cost prohibitive, this has been the best option so far. So I'm just going to pause there again, because I can't see the chat, but Emily and Sam, I think the intention here was just to start by giving some concrete examples of how research or farmer-led research has been a part of our early work. Anything either of you would like to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that this trial and other trials that went on at this site have been immensely helpful for us, and they're also still causing headaches to this day at this site. It's definitely it's hard to say because it's our oldest site, so our biggest trees are there, but at the same time it seems to be much more uneven, and it seems like the growth rates we're seeing at some of our newer plantings are a lot better, and those trees will catch up. Yeah, it's in some ways it's kind of our worst orchard. Sometimes I'm like cursing when I'm working there, but that's why you start small, right? The first planting here was, I believe, 8 acres, and then it expanded to 22 acres. So every time we've expanded since then, we've taken the learnings from that first planting. So I'm grateful that we did these trials early, or that Russell did these trials early, so that when we started planting 50, 100, 200 acres, we're not multiplying any of those problems. And I think that's kind of a theme throughout this presentation is just doing safe to fail trials.
Yeah, and just to emphasize what Sam was just saying, so this is that orchard in May and June of 2019. This is my folks. When we first started planting, it was like literally me and my parents planting in an old cornfield. And at the time, we were laying this out with just tape rolls, like 300-foot tapes. You can see the electric metal conduits staked to show each tree location. And also, I think I just want to name, like, there's often a lot of discussion that I see online about like what's the ideal way to do things. And like when Sam says this is our worst planting, the lease was signed April 15th. It was a really wet April, so we didn't get the ground seeded down till the middle of May. And we ended up planting most of these trees in like late June, which in our context is really a pretty late planting season. And even at that time, this was freshly tilled corn ground, so it's quite easy digging. But we were doing trials like using, a gas-powered one-person auger to see how much that improved the process, and just seeing every step of the way how many different ways could we be doing things and learning from them. And so these are those same trees 5 years after planting.
Yeah, just one thing that can happen too when there's so many variables in agriculture in general, and especially in agroforestry. And when you start to layer a lot of these different trials, and they're all in different spots and everything, it can be really hard to have true controls. And I think as much as possible, it's great to set up controls and to try and separate out cause and effect. But to some degree with field research, I think it's just a matter of getting experience and doing as much stuff as possible and trying to pay attention. And you can kind of piece it apart later on. It's probably not going to make it into a peer-reviewed journal, and that's okay.
And just to highlight some of where things have been challenging. So, for example, here, what was being shown is the electric line is being run down the alleys, and so the paddock is actually just between the trees. Whereas in this image, what you're seeing is what we refer to as inclusive grazing, where your fencing is actually around multiple rows of trees. Again, to Sam's point, we didn't have a control running side by side in the same season with comparable feed value of alley exclusive grazing versus inclusive grazing. But in short, there was enough damage to our trees in this instance, which was basically the grazers responding to a lack of forage in an alley context and the moves that would be required to have their full herd only in that alley at that time of year, such so that they expanded the paddock with our permission. And what we found out, for example, was the interaction of calves wanting to play with the tree tubes, especially in a context where not everything is in a solid planter tube. So the tube in the foreground, I believe, is a Tree Pro tube, which the difference being a Tree Pro tube is not a continuous cylinder. It actually is basically a flat piece of plastic that you roll and twist tie. And what we've seen is actually the juncture where that twist tie is holding it is a weak point. And so what you can start to have is trees pulling against that, or when cattle are interacting with it. So I would say, for example, we learned enough to see that some of the variation, as Sam called out, in tree protection strategies only exacerbated the challenges that we saw with inclusive grazing of cattle in our context with young trees. I feel quite confident that moved regularly enough with our 5 to 8 year old trees, you could minimize that damage. This year we had cattle for a day or two under our trees in late May and early June, and there was really no issue because we'd pruned them up to 7-foot laterals. But with the young trees, it was an issue. And here's just another image showing the welded wire cage example with a Tree Pro tube behind it, and also highlighting some of the diverse understory that started to evolve. This pasture actually was only seeded with a perennial rye and Dutch white clover. So the diversity you see emerging is just in response to management and the existing seed bank. And here's just a little drone shot from, I believe this is summer 2024, again, of that cornfield from 2019. So again, as we've gone to a much larger scale from that 2019 planting, we're carrying some of those learnings forward. And to Sam's point, thinking about how do we learn at a small scale and then adopt those learnings at a larger scale. Another example of kind of learning by doing is we did trial a partnership where a grazer was coming into our land base and grazing with a 200 animal herd of sheep. What we found, and this is kind of more of a sociological bit of research, again, as Sam said earlier, everything we're doing in terms of managing, this is actually a hickory chestnut interplanting with a diverse understory in ground that was stripped of its topsoil under previous management. It's very hard to go find academic literature that captures all of that variability and gives you guidance on how do you form that partnership in a way that works. And in this case, what ended up happening is the sheep were on site for 2 days and the grazer decided it didn't work with his business model, which was very dependent on only needing to do end of day moves. And for his 200 animal herd, working within 40-foot alleys was not a fit for him. And one of the sociological learnings we had there is that given the newness of what we're doing, or I would say the uniqueness of what we're doing in our specific context, because there are plenty of people practicing silvopasture or growing chestnuts, but not specifically where we are and on the land base that we're managing. It kind of necessitates having the partnerships be in-house such that we can facilitate the amount of creativity and kind of collaboration around these intercropping and animal integration strategies as is necessary to figure out how to make them work. Having a partner who wasn't willing to iterate throughout a growing season just wasn't really a workable option because we couldn't make firm commitments about what this system was going to look like. So one of the ways we took that learning into our business is to say, we're going to start a sheep grazing operation on our own land base that is going to be run by the Breadtree team. And we started that investment this year at a 40 animal feeder scale. So animals that were brought to site in June at about, I believe, 5 months old, and then grazed within our orchard system until November, at which point they were slaughtered. And the amount that we learned from doing that in-house is hugely informing our understanding of what it might look like over the next 10 years to develop, a fuller scale grazing system. And I think Sam's going to talk a little bit about some of what we learned this year. And these are just some images showing our plantings at scale under some of the different establishment strategies that we've taken. But Sam, at this point, I think we're starting to get into some of the understory management and mowing and diversity. Do you want to share a little bit about some of the learnings we've had on the mowing context?
Sure. Yeah. So this image that's actually me on our little Ventrac tractor there mowing just right around the trees. And we've done a lot of iteration with mowing. Yeah, it's kind of funny. You'd think mowing would be the simplest thing ever, but we think a lot about it. There's a lot of kind of like overlapping goals with mowing. One of the main ones that people think about when they're planting orchards is rodent management. Voles and mice love to eat the bark of trees, especially in the winter. And so if you can keep that habitat down, or at least expose the rodents to predator pressure a little bit more, that can help with that. What I've seen is that a lot of orchards, with that in mind, end up turning their orchards into golf courses and mowing constantly, keeping everything cropped really short. There's a lot of recommendations out there to only plant shallow rooted grasses and clovers that quote unquote don't compete with the trees for a number of reasons. Yeah, we've started to just feel that is not actually the best approach. We're really interested in sort of treating our farms as an ecosystem. And if we're really thinking about soil health, both to benefit our trees and for the ecosystem services that comes from that, we really need to think a little more about our ground cover. And so we've been exposed to some research. It was Dr. Christine Jones from Australia that first exposed us to this, but the long-running experiment that she often cites is called the Jena experiment, Jena, and that's out of Germany, I believe. That's an experiment that's been going on for a couple decades, where they have been looking at pasture or grassland diversity, a bunch of different plots with different numbers of species. I think their plots, they at least go over 30 species in some of the plots. It might be more than that. And they're comparing that against monocultures and duocultures, and they have lots of replications. That is very rigorous research. And yeah, they've demonstrated some really impressive things. And it's not just a question of, add one more species and you get a little bit of a boost in soil health or ecosystem services like water infiltration and stuff like that. There's actually thresholds that you hit in terms of diversity, where once you hit that threshold, stuff starts to happen. You could dig through all the research and try and understand that a little bit more with a little more detail. But what Dr. Christine Jones recommends is getting at least 5 plant families represented in a given. She talks a lot about annual cover crops, but also pastures. So that's been something that we've been trying to achieve in our orchards and even trying to go beyond that. I've been looking a lot into literature around prairie reconstruction, and like what are the thresholds of species diversity there that result in a stable and functional grassland ecosystem. That's, it's blurry lines, but we're starting to plant species mixtures that are 30 plus species. And we have been seeing some impressive results with that. We've also been managing that ground cover once it's planted, uh, to promote diversity. So allowing things to go to seed, also just allowing for flowers to attract beneficial insects. And we are managing actually for maximum biomass, or at least that's what I'm managing for. Whereas other orchards are often going for that golf course effect. I really want to generate as much biomass as possible and then cycle that biomass either via grazing or mowing at strategic times and really let all that plant diversity express itself. We still do a lot of mowing, and sometimes it actually ends up being you might mow less frequently, but when you do mow, you have a lot of material that you have to get through, so you need some high-powered equipment. We have a 75 horsepower tractor with a big flail mower on it. We also have a skid steer with a brush hog, and then we use that little Ventrac to weave in between the trees. That's what I was doing in that earlier picture. And that one can struggle a little bit. It's a relatively low powered machine. But anyway, our mowing is kind of staggered. So we mow very tight, close to the trees, generally speaking, at least for the first few years. And then, especially in our wider 40-foot alleys that are designed for silvopasture, we'll often allow a strip to grow for almost the entire season so it can go to seed. It's habitat for different animals and birds and whatnot. And then we'll try to mow or graze in pulses, that are kind of spread across the landscape. So you have that heterogeneity of habitat, and there's always some green grass growing. Yeah, so this is at our home farm in Salem. In an ideal world, we would be grazing everything, but we only just started our sheep operation. We had 40 head of sheep this year, and we have hundreds of acres under management. So a lot of it is still just being mowed. And in this case, I want to say that the tree rows were mowed probably 2 or 3 times before this picture was taken. This farm is definitely just more productive as a baseline than some of our others, just due to the soil and past management. And we planted where some of these fields had been in cornfield, or they were prepared to plant corn. And then we came in and seeded, I believe it was a 15 species mixture. That was one that actually Noah put together. And that was very instructive, actually, because I think he could maybe speak to this if he wants to, but I believe this was before we were exposed to Christine Jones or any of this research. And his idea was just that diversity is good. And he called up the seed salesman and basically got the guy to give him as much stuff as he could. And that mixture took off really well, pretty dominated by chicory, plantain, and sweet clover, as well as orchard grass and some of our other non-native cool season grasses. Yeah, so that mixture has performed really well. It produces a lot of biomass. So in the tree row, we are mowing 2 to 3 times a season. And then in the alley, we'll let everything grow until August or so. And then at that point, we will go in and we'll do 2 passes with the mower, 2 or 3 passes, and just leave a strip of vegetation in the middle. You have grass in the tree row that is regrowing from the last mowing event. You mow in the alleys, and that knocks it all the way down. And we're mowing pretty tight. And then we're leaving that sort of mohawk or strip in the middle. And so we have this staggered pattern. And then in a couple weeks where I just mowed, is going to be lush and green. And what we've found too is that because even though we're mowing really, really tight, since we have a very long rest period, nearly a full season rest period, that grass is going to rebound really quickly. So even though I mowed that in the middle of a drought, it regrew pretty aggressively. And then we actually came through with our sheep later in the season and we were able to graze some of that. And it was really high quality for the last month or so of the life cycle of those sheep. So we finished them on some really nice grass and forbs.
Yeah, so just a few examples of observations that we've had under this management system that I would say for us are farmer research, but also as we've said, like wouldn't necessarily go in an academic article. So for us, a huge thing is basically like how much biomass can we allow in our orchards and in our alleys without creating too much vole habitat. And so like when Sam's talking about, I believe this image was taken like late September, but I might be wrong. So the tree rows got mowed again over the subsequent month. That's like our in-row kind of like final before winter. And what we're doing there is basically saying, okay, voles, you can have a strip of habitat, which is where you see the goldenrod and the dormant grasses in the center of the alley. You can have that habitat. And also there's a little bit of a quite intense truth that if you run a flail mower with a roller bar on either side of that mohawk, that there probably is also some rodent predation by the mower. And so right now, this is like a balance for us of actually maintaining pretty substantial habitat within an orchard, but doing so basically as far from the trees as possible. Because as much as I don't necessarily like voles for what they do to our trees, they do provide pretty valuable ecosystem services in terms of kind of turning over the soil at a micro scale and increasing infiltration rates with their tunnels. I think that the level of like micro texturing that they're doing of the soil is actually meaningful, especially in soils that have been quite historically compacted. Another learning that we had from this system in the bottom left of this, basically where the brown strips cease to exist in the left of this image is a former hayfield, whereas everywhere that the brown strips are was corn. Both of those fields got seeded down with significant diversity. The cool season grass dominated hayfields did not establish, the diversity did not establish nearly as well. And so when you're seeing those brown strips, what that actually is substantially more biomass of forbs that had senesced and then got mowed. It's not that it's dead. It's actually just where it is in the season, in its phenology. But there was a fascinating learning that we had again, and this actually was like a pretty good side-by-side control, which is that in 2024, the year that these trees were planted, this image is from 2025. In 2024 was a record Japanese beetle year. The organic supplier who sold us the BT that we used to spray our trees to suppress Japanese beetle development said I think by the second week of July, which is only about halfway through our Japanese beetle season in New York, he had sold more than twice as much of that product as he'd ever sold before, which is the beetle-specific BT strain. What we observed is that in the hayfield, where it was pretty much cool season grasses and then chestnuts in tubes, it was a chestnut in tube buffet for the Japanese beetles. And even despite us spraying, I think twice down the tubes with that BT product, we had about 20% full defoliation of the 1-year-old chestnuts. In the immediately abutting area, shown with the brown strips here, that had much more diversity, 15 species seeded down, plus because it was formerly fallowed corn ground, it actually had a more diverse seed bank expressing already. So I would guess there was 20 to 40 species growing there, but also importantly, many more broadleaf species, not just grasses. What we saw was almost no full defoliation. You saw Japanese beetles on some of the chestnut trees, but I would say less than 1% of the trees got fully defoliated versus 20% in the immediately abutting field, a difference of 40 feet. So less about the spatial relationship and how far Japanese beetles travel because they travel miles, and more seemingly about the species mix of the understory. We all on our team have pet hypotheses, and I think this is one of the examples of the limits of the scale of research we're doing is we can't really confidently claim the causal relationship, but I can tell you that I saw many dock leaves and chicory leaves that had been predated by the Japanese beetle, which suggests to me that having broadleaves other than your crop tree in an orchard is quite valuable when you're dealing with foliar pests that aren't eating much of the grass. But also we saw significantly more insect diversity as well as bird pressure because of the insect diversity. And so there's kind of an open question of, was it that there were more birds predating the beetles before they got into the tubes where the birds can't access, or was it more that there was other food for the beetles, or was it all of the above? Or is it that the trees are healthier because the soil's in better condition because of the diversity? It's probably all of it. And I think that is an example of kind of the limits of the type of research we're doing. Is it's not really appropriate for us to claim this is exactly what caused this to work, but it was pretty obvious that it was working. I will also say this year, in a historic drought year, again, anecdotally, but digging around in the soil around our trees under the layer of mulch, there was noticeably more to the touch moisture content in the soil in the more diverse understory than in the hayfield. There also was more sign of aggregation even in the soils that were quite dry. They just had more of that kind of aggregated blockiness than we see in the quite compacted hayfields, both of which are kind of suggested by the existing body of research, but just examples of how through observation and some anecdotal evidence in the right context, you can still observe the impacts of your management decision. All right, I will pause there.
This is great. Thanks. I think just to start, just kind of dialing back to this question about sort of like the origins of this kind of farm-led research. I know that as farmers, we're all engaged in observation all the time, right? Like that's just part of being present and being with the land and participatory. So when you're thinking about research and the way you approach these things, where are you drawing the line between sort of casual observation and then crossing over into like, I'm researching now, and how important even is that distinction, or when do you lean into one versus the other? I know that's kind of a nebulous question, but if you want to just kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is, I think for us, a lot of how we make sense of this like research versus observation is basically how much it informs our understanding of what works for our business. And I mean, like, not business in the sense of it's always dollars and cents, but in like a more holistic sense of like the people doing the work of the food we're producing. And is it altering the quality of that food? Is it creating a healthier overall agro ecosystem that we believe over the long term is in the best interest of the land and animals and plants that we're caring for? And so like some of that is like multi-decade questions. Some of it is quite easy, like we have significantly reduced the amount of weeding we do, and we've observed that hasn't actually, yeah, right? Like everyone who works on the team likes that we do less weeding today. We also invested in a row mulcher, whereas we used to mulch with hay forks off the back of a hay wagon. And everyone, I think, agrees like this is a better system. And we can kind of do the cost assessment of a finance piece of equipment and how much we're as a team getting compensated for the work and how much happier people feel. And like, I don't even know what the academic literature would be. Like, would you survey the team and have to quantify, like on a scale of 1 to 10 for it to be considered rigorous enough research versus like trusting the qualitative experience of talking to a human being and hearing that they feel happier? So to some extent, it is a little bit of just like being alive and asking questions about a living system and how it works, whether you're talking about people or animals or trees. But in terms of that, like where does observation become kind of farmer research conclusion? But I also think, for an example that we've been talking about a lot recently is like with oaks, we're starting to plant out research plantings for oak breeding for the purpose of creating acorn flower systems. If you look at the existing body of research, there is basically no understandable reason why you would plant oaks for commercial production. The existing body of forestry research, pretty much every paper says something like red oaks don't produce acorns for between 20 and 25 years. Almost all of that research has been conducted in a forest context. We, in the past year, have been somewhat programmatically observing more precocious and heavily masting red oaks in like campus and street tree and cemetery settings. And it's immediately like a quite small amount of data has already immediately totally disregarded the body of research that exists around red oaks and precocity. So Sam and I have both harvested over 100 pounds from oaks that have been planted in the past 10 to 15 years. So it's just, if we want to say like we have to wait until a paper is written to justify our human observations of these trees, then we're probably going to wait another 50 years for that work to actually manifest in an agricultural context, whereas we've already begun propagating red oaks from trees that we've observed, knowing that they may not be the best or the most productive red oak, but they are definitely quite productive and worth propagating and learning from, and continuing to monitor the parents of those seedlings. And that, to me, that's just a great example of like, we don't have to find the best tree, or we don't have to get to a perfect conclusion sometimes to know that something is worth pursuing or that it works in an agricultural context. And I would say we still have like far more questions than answers around oaks, but we've at least seen enough productivity in the populations we're observing in an unmanaged context to believe that it's worth us experimenting in a managed context.
One thing that I find helpful is getting just enough data to inform your qualitative analysis. So, for instance, with the oaks, it would be totally onerous to measure the yield of every single tree that we're harvesting from. But if you can get a little bit of data from a few trees, you can then train your eyes to identify heavy bearing trees. So I found one tree this year that, based on aerial photography, is probably between 15 and 20 years old, and it's just growing on the campus of University of Albany next to a bus stop. And that tree, I picked up every single acorn off the ground. I was on my hands and knees for a few hours trying to get every single last one. That produced 150 pounds of acorns this year, which blows a lot of chestnuts out of the water. And it's definitely undermanaged. It was definitely planted poorly as a traumatized ball and burlap tree, and it's growing in compacted soil next to a bus stop. But anyway, by measuring the yield of that tree exactly, then I can look under a tree. I can look at the acorns on the ground, and I can say, oh, that looks like it's 75% as productive as this one that I kind of have a reference for. So yeah, we don't need to be tracking data on everything, but I think it's good to calibrate ourselves every once in a while. Yeah, and then the other way that I think about research is it's just kind of something, you are definitely making observations every day just in the act of farming and making your daily decisions. But to me, research is more about going out on a limb to do something that maybe hasn't been done before, or something that is, it's going to cost you a little bit in time and energy, and it might be a waste of time, and you might create some headaches for yourself later, but you're doing it with the explicit purpose of learning. And I would say Breadtree probably does that more than the average farm. We might do it too much sometimes, but it adds up, and you can, yeah, that's the way that you're going to learn new things, you know. There's a lot of this stuff with like the pasture diversity, like these seed mixes that I've been putting together for our new orchards. There is no resource out there that is going to tell you how to, like, what is the seeding rate of each species in a 30 species mixture of all these plants that like no one has ever put together in a seed box before. And, you know, what am I supposed to tell the guy with the 30-foot wide Great Plains seed drill about how to calibrate his seeder to do this mixture with all these different seed sizes? Like the information just doesn't exist. That's yeah, you got to just go for it at some point.
That leads me nicely into one of the other questions we talked about, which is sort of, you know, this idea of research sort of being this lived experience, and that interaction between the two things. And, you know, you can sort of step up your observations to be more systematic and, you know, more like specific data driven or specific data points driven. And just kind of, you know, then there's this other world of like, you know, what might be considered like official research. And there's room for everybody, certainly. And how do we connect these worlds? Because it sounds to me like what you're talking about, it just the standalone example of the red oaks, which is just one thing you guys are doing right now, right, is extremely valuable to the greater agroforestry community and economically to the country, and if not the world, you know, like this is important stuff. So how do we connect these worlds to knowing that in some spaces things sort of almost require what we would maybe call the official research to be able to be given credit?
This question is something that I almost see our process is kind of like emergent from lived experience to data, where, and I think one of the benefits that we have is that we have a significant community of folks. Like we work super closely with the folks at Yellowbud Farm Nursery, for example. And one of the things that happens when you have 10, 15, 20 people interacting on the same topic is lived experience has to be translated into kind of agreed upon variables that you're observing. Because you start to realize just saying like, this is a productive tree and that's a productive tree starts to not feel all that meaningful when everyone is saying it in a interesting way. And like, when you start to be like, okay, well, which of these 50 trees are we going to collect seed from and grow out in our nursery and then plant in orchards? You start to realize you need actually more pointed questions. And I think for me, what has been helpful is thinking about like, that progression from this is a great tree or these are high quality chestnuts, which I actually find to be like a quite frustrating phrase when people are like, this has good nut quality. That is totally dependent on the context and what you're choosing to measure for your context. So like if I'm trying to create the most productive flower orchards for chestnut, the qualities that I'm selecting for are very different than if I'm trying to do small scale fresh nut production. And so with acorns, for example, the reason I have these two trees up, a tree on my left, the smaller tree, is about 13 years from planting, produced 70 pounds this year. Based on seeing what was under it last winter, I believe it produced more the year before. It's a very compact canopy. The tree on the right is roughly 90 years old based on aerial imagery, maybe 100 years old, 90-foot spread, absolutely massive tree. I estimated based on looking at the canopy and kind of the nut density that it was 1,000-pound tree this year. I know that over 400 pounds were harvested from this tree, like across a span of 6 weeks. So it was without a doubt over a 500-pound producing tree. What's interesting though, is this tree on the left is actually more representative to me of the genetics that we want to be selecting for, which we've seen in a few younger specimens, because it's higher performing. If we ignore like yield stability and masting cycles for a second, in its peak production years or masting years, it's higher performing in a pounds of acorns per square foot of canopy perspective. And that's not to say that we shouldn't also plant the progeny of the 90-year-old tree who obviously can thrive in our ecological context and is super productive and like truly a religious experience to spend time with. Her production is like 0.15 pounds to 0.2 pounds per square foot of canopy, whereas the tree on the left is like approaching half a pound per square foot of canopy. And we've seen other young specimens like that. And the truth is, if we can manage more smaller canopies of red oaks like the tree on the left that are producing more densely and carry that across 50 years, that we'll have more production and be able to plant more red oaks, especially in an agricultural context. And so it's an interesting thing where like we could list seedlings from this 1,000-pound producing tree as this tree produces 1,000 pounds of acorns. And that is how a lot of folks communicate around tree crops. And I actually think the fact that it produced 1,000 pounds of acorns is like not actually that important of a data point if we're trying to talk about an agricultural system. And it's not that it's a bad tree, but it's just not, to me, the variable I would be selecting for in if I had to choose a variable, I guess. And that's to me shifting from like qualitative lived experience to data collection.
I just wanted to share a thought on this question of sort of like the relative merits or comparative roles of farmer-led field research versus more like academic science. Just to say, I think in the spirit of like empowering everyone to feel like you don't have to wait for someone else to tell you what you can do. Like, just think about a couple of examples, like Bob Staley, who founded the Wintergreen Tree Farm uh, in Hiram, Ohio, indisputably has done like among the most important chestnut breeding work in the country. Some would say the most, but like definitely, top three most important, like the kind of work that has made it possible for us to do the farming that we do. Bob Staley was a roofer. Like it's not, like Bob Staley's learned a lot about progeny testing and breeding and like I'm not saying that to denigrate Bob. I'm trying to say like it's not, you don't need to have like a master's degree in plant physiology or agronomics or whatever it is to make incredible strides. You just have to like pay close attention. And I think the same is true in the case of the oak research. Like if we could assemble if we could do exactly what Bob did with oaks and assemble a population that works agronomically and works agriculturally, like I don't think that another farmer, the person who, will be looking to us the way we look to him, will be saying like, where's the peer-reviewed research that proves that what we're looking at with our own eyes is happening. And that's not to say there isn't value to that, but just like it isn't, I don't think, a necessary condition for these kinds of like processes of intergenerational progress and knowledge exchange to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And you hear it discussed a lot, the concept of like farmer adoption and agroforestry with agroforestry practices and the importance of demonstration farms and the whole seeing is believing and farmers trusting other farmers. And I don't think that's really talked about as much as it might be in terms of like farmers trusting other farmers in terms of like, farmer-led research type projects. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that just clicked for me just now. So the first question is, do y'all utilize any SARE partnerships or other research-based partnerships or grants that help you have a more research-based approach to your work?
Yeah, the only formal research partnership we have right now is with TSIP, the Soil Inventory Project out of Skidmore. They're doing soil carbon sampling on our farm. I think I'm right in saying that's the only one. We've had a number of researchers come out from different universities just to see what we're up to. And like I said, to start the call, we're pretty open book about this and see our work as like an amazing palette for grad students and researchers to engage with. And we'd love for more folks to do that. I think, sorry, it was formalized research. Oh, SARE. With regard to SARE, we have limited office resources, folks like me who farm by just spending their time on a laptop these days. And so when it comes to applying for grant opportunities, we're pretty tough on basically like how it is going to relate to the cash flow of our business and does it change our operations meaningfully. And frankly, the like financial structures of SARE grants when I've reviewed them, for basically requiring just as much work as some of the other grant opportunities we apply to. It's basically a lot more and different work than our team is already doing for not a financial structure that works for our business when I've looked at it. That's not to say SARE isn't a great program. It's just for us to take it on. Every new thing we do makes our business a lot harder. And so we have to be kind of picky about what new things we do and how it fits into our team's capacity. If someone wanted to write a SARE grant and use our operations as the basis for their SARE grant and do the work of the SARE grant, we would say, hell yes. It's just more about us being picky about what opportunities we're going after.
And I think,
Russell,
I think Northeast SARE is still open for like one more week. So
someone get on it. The more we've planted trees, the more we've been contacted by folks who say something along the lines of, we love what you're doing. We are not farmers, but what does it look like for us to work with you? And those folks are on a spectrum from like basically seeing a chestnut orchard as a passive investment that we will harvest from and sell their chestnuts and they'll get an offtake rate on it, to folks who are like, what's the really cool tree crops thing you want to be doing, but you guys can't afford to do as a research project? And so that's how, like, all of the oak we're planting is on land that we don't own. We're being paid to do the genetic selection, to design the planting, to plant those trees and to manage them, and then collect data on them over time. Again, like, someone could do an entire PhD on the red oak plantings we're doing, and we would be happy for that, and the landowners would also be happy for that. But it's kind of our way of subsidizing in-house research. Sam and Noah have also been doing a lot of work on trying to get a trial for intensive silvopasture off the ground. And we're lucky enough to have partners at the Monarch Foundation who are paying us to manage intensive silvopasture trial within an existing sheep operation. That's a whole like another 2-hour webinar if folks want to talk more about ISP. There's a lot of information on our website about that as well.
awesome. I'm going to keep rolling because we've got a few good ones in the queue. What is your process for collecting data with the different strategies? So you've got tree protections, you've talked about labor time, nut weights, all of these different things. How do you keep all your data straight with a big team and a lot of field work? How does that work?
I would say it's probably a weakness of what we're doing. So we are currently, this is our pilot year of using a software tool called Sector Mentor, which was designed by a commercial vineyardist in Chile. And it is a challenging thing on data collection with trees, for if there are any geospatial nerds here, because we do quite a bit of mapping, is basically like a lot of the existing survey tools treat the survey as the thing that's most important, and we need to treat the tree as the thing that's most important. And so one of our challenges has been finding a tool that allows us to talk about trees and not just talk about the instance of data that we are collecting. Even having a tool like that, I think Sam was recently observing that it's actually just quite a lot of work to, like, when you're in the orchard, every tree you walk to, take out your phone and collect really measured observations on each. So we're also learning from the work Bob Steele has done and adopting some of his system of making colored marks that represent certain observations right on a tree. So for example, in potato leafhopper and Japanese beetle season, marking every tree with a green mark that had low foliar predation from those pests, as like these trees are showing some resistance to those pests. But I think it's a weak spot for us right now. A lot of it is like WhatsApp chatter and phone calls and saying, okay, we observed enough to make a decision, and then just making that decision and getting to work on it. Sam, anything else you'd add?
a lot of spreadsheets, some more rigorous than other, in terms of like the actual data, that actual raw data that goes into them versus like assumptions. But even with assumptions, it's helpful, or to be able to build a spreadsheet where you can toggle some of the variables and then see how the outcomes change when you don't have the raw data. That can help you kind of like think about what experiments you need to do, just trying to identify what the critical variables might be for something. But I would agree with Russell that it's it's a bit of a weak point at the moment. Which is why, just going back to the previous question about the interplay of sort of academic research and farmer-led field research, I think that what we're doing and what other farmers are doing is kind of like establishing the palette of options, just kind of like throwing things at the wall and seeing what has promise and seeing what like definitely doesn't work. You'd never do it again. And then if we can get interest from academics and they can come to our farms and they can either study these systems that we've established or they can pull ideas from them to study them with a little bit more of a controlled environment. I think that's really valuable. I would love to have more academics on our farms doing like really rigorous research, because I'm really excited about a lot of these things that we're doing, and I also don't want to speak too confidently about anything when we don't have all of the answers. There's everything kind of exists on a gradient, and there are some things that I would happily recommend to any other farmer, but more data is certainly better. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can all work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And this next question kind of leans into some of this too. And the question is, do you have specific methodologies for capturing your lived experiences as research? And I feel like to some extent, I see some of what people are doing. I don't know, certain people who are just like really methodical about their blogging about what they're doing, or really even just like YouTube channels that are like really thoroughly documenting things. Or even if we look at the historical publications of the NNGA journals, it's like that was really like the generational move of that time. It's like, oh, this is my documentation of my lived experience. And there's so many people right now of, I would say, this sort of cohort of agroforestry, if you will, working with this very elderly cohort of agroforesters and nut growers from previous generations. And I'm always telling people, like, just bring a tape recorder when you go, or like, well, realistically, you put a recording app on your phone when you go and, just record the whole thing. You can put it in ChatGPT later and have it turn into chapters or whatever. But what do you guys do for the lived experience piece? Like, do you have anything around that?
So we have a few practices that have been increasingly adopted this year. One, I'd say this year versus last year, we've done a better job of having like bi-weekly full team check-ins. So if there's something that's like just important coming up in any aspect of the business, we can talk about it, which is like a simple thing, but it's also like often really hard to prioritize. Another is that this year we have a Google form that the intention is that any day someone is working in the field, they are filling in basically an activity record of what they did, where they did it, what they observed. And so then retroactively, we can look back across the season and say, okay, how many days did someone spend on a mower? What mower were they using? What site were they at? And learn from it that way. And also it gives us not a perfectly implemented, but a way of at least like at the end of the day, oh, I noticed this thing that I really want to make sure like gets captured. That'll be in kind of like a qualitative discussion for every day. We also, along with that, implemented like a site check responsibility because we're monitoring 6 different plantings across like a 40-mile gradient. Having responsibilities within our team of who's doing a bi-weekly at a minimum site check across the season. And that's all captured in a Google form and then thus in a spreadsheet as well. I think those are like the 3 most systematic ways. Tomorrow we're actually having our second like end of season whole team reflection, where I think probably some more things will bubble up. So I think there's a little bit of redundancy necessary, but some of it is just like making space to even be considering what did we learn this year.
And photos and videos are really helpful. I need to do a better job of organizing all of that material and also presenting it in a way that's useful for other people. We have talked about the idea of maybe doing a blog on our website or something like that. Yeah, because there are a lot of observations and lived experience that are you can't really translate into data, but they're still valuable. I think I would love it if some other farmers were doing that and I could keep up with them that way. Oftentimes, unfortunately, you have to be on social media sometimes to get those insights, which has kind of kept me glued to those apps.
Mhm.
I would rather be off of them. Yeah, that's where you can get those daily insights from other people doing this, the kind of leading edge work. And so, yeah, I think be great if we all did a little bit more uh, writing in a place that was better for our brain than Instagram or something like that.
I'd also say, while I am an AI skeptic, I think our team is finding that one really good use of AI is, for example, recording kind of meatier discussions, downloading the transcript, and then asking Claude or another AI to kind of synthesize that transcript into a few key points. That's actually how we generated most of the FAQ on our website and continue to grow it. Is like, as we took, I don't even know how many hours or like long emails, plugged it all in and said provide an FAQ for our website, and then we edited it as humans. But I do think Sam's been doing some really awesome work of taking podcast transcripts and turning them into key learnings around certain agricultural systems, of podcast transcripts of other farmers. So I think there are tools like that where we can kind of bring information together and learn from each other.
Well, this has been such a fun and fascinating conversation, and I feel like we could talk so much more about these things, but unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I do want to just ask if y'all have any closing words, maybe to the point that Noah made, and also thank you, Noah, for fielding all the other Q&A. That's been just really helpful to have going on in the background. Thank you. But to the point of you don't need to wait for someone to give you permission to like dive into the the thing that you're excited about. I don't know. Do y'all want to leave anyone with just some final words of inspiration or empowerment about just getting out there and doing it?
Yeah, I just feel increasingly strongly that things that are accepted truths are often, it's like one person did one research study in one context, and then a bunch of people regurgitated it in other papers to the extent that we all decided there's no other way the world could be. And the more I experience the world, the more I encounter different tree species in different agricultural contexts, the more I'm certain that like we just have no fucking clue how the world works. And so if you think there might be a chance that it works differently and you'd prefer that version of reality, then like you might as well at least see if your eyes can tell you that there are alternate realities than what someone else has written in a paper. Because so far I've been surprised at how many times the truth is there are alternate realities than what someone has written in a paper somewhere, and that's a way more fun than just continuing on as things are.
I think on the sort of other side of what Russell just said, for me coming into this career path with no prior background and without like a clear, I couldn't necessarily go get a degree in agroforestry 6 years ago. Maybe that's changed now. There just like wasn't a clear path into all this. And I am a bit of an information junkie, and I read all the books and I scoured the internet and all that stuff. And there's like in the sort of alternative agriculture space, there's a lot of gurus out there and a lot of people that like promote their brand of doing this stuff. And it can be very convincing, and there's a lot of good stuff in all of that. It's not worth. I don't think you should discount any of that. I think you should expose yourself to all of it, but at the end of the day, you gotta get out and do stuff yourself, and it is, I think, worth asking some of those types of people for their numbers, including us. I would say like demand that we get better at tracking our data um, as we start to like make some of these claims about how our agricultural systems work. And I think actually the biggest thing is how much food is actually being produced. There's a lot of like cool farm systems out there that aren't actually producing or not getting that much food out to the community. And currently we're kind of in that boat because our trees are young. But you know, in 10 or 15 years, if you're not seeing Breadtree chestnuts in stores, you should start asking some questions.
Noah, do you want to add anything?
I just think that this is like a a field of work and a discipline that is in a really nascent stage of development, such that regular people can do like groundbreaking, really important and consequential work, and there's nothing really stopping people from doing it. Like it's just like doing math in the 1500s. Like you get to figure out gravity. You get to like figure out uh new basic staple foods that just like our culture has been ignoring for uh since colonization. And it's like it's not because we're so smart, we're just lucky. We're all just lucky to be in a place in space and time where like the dominant culture has ignored some really important facts about life and the place that we live. So I just want to encourage people to feel empowered to do it and follow their nose.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you so much being here. People are sharing some love in the chat, saying, thanks, Breadtree. Your care and love in this work is seen and appreciated. So we will let it go on that. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. This is a wrap for 2025. We'll see you again in 2026. And I hope y'all have a wonderful turn of the year. Take care.